Human Rights Watch has released a report indicating that child labor in America is dangerous and still occurs on U.S. tobacco farms. Now, they did specifically look at tobacco farms, but the larger issue here is the child labor laws that we have when it comes to agriculture. Apparently, if you are running a small farm, you can have children working on it. Some of them can be as young as 7. And that is something that Human Rights Watch believes is extremely unsafe, and they want to bring attention to it. So according to their report, children as young as 7 are sometimes working long hours in fields, harvesting nicotine and pesticide-laced tobacco leaves under sometimes hazardous conditions. And if you look at who they talked to for their report, they actually interviewed 140 children, and they're working in farms in North Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia. They also say, and also the CEO of Philip Morris decided to respond to the findings. And here's what he had to say. This report uncovers serious child labor abuses that should not occur on any farm anywhere. More work remains to be done to eliminate child and other labor abuses in tobacco growing. Okay, well,
it's a good statement, I suppose.
It's a good statement. I just wonder how genuine and sincere the statement is, because as a major corporation, you must be aware of what's going on in these practices, right?
I mean, it's certainly possible. Like, I assume when we're talking about farms that could be very small in some cases, gigantic farms, and they're all sending, you know, what they produce to companies like Philip Morris. I don't know exactly how much oversight they have on the internal practices of the farms. And I understand sort of, like, we're going to get into, I'm sure, sort of the legality of some of these things. I understand probably the idea behind allowing kids as young as 7 to work at these farms. It's like, oh, I have a farm, my kids want to help out. Like, it's a family farm, we don't have 1,000 employees. That's the idea, but in practice, that's not what happens. What happens is you bring in, you know, undocumented labor and things like that. And I think it might be time to revisit the legislation.
Definitely. Oh my God, it's beyond time to visit the legislation. I don't think that 7-year-olds have any place on a tobacco farm. I don't. And there are lawmakers.
Milking a goat maybe, or something.
Well, look, if you want to have a conversation about, like, picking apples or doing something like that, it's fine. But the fact that we have agricultural laws set in place that allow for child labor, and it's backbreaking labor in some cases, is unacceptable. And I'll give you some examples of what's happening to these kids. But first, just so you know how many children are working on farms right now, it's about 736,500 children under the age of 18 in U.S. farms in 2012 alone. And so if you want to get a sense of the kind of injuries and symptoms that are suffering as a result of some of the farming, not all of it, nearly 3/4 of the children interviewed in 2012 and 2013 reported vomiting, nausea, and headaches while working on tobacco farms. The symptoms they reported are consistent with nicotine poisoning, often called green tobacco sickness, which occurs when workers absorb nicotine through their skin while handling tobacco plants.
Yeah. I mean, we've sort of come to grips as a society with the health implications of smoking. Like, you voluntarily do that to yourself to some extent. But I mean, the kids, I assume many of them are not smokers, and they have to go through many of the same symptoms as the smokers themselves, which is horrible. It's all, like, it doesn't need to exist as an industry. That Philip Morris CEO, he should be out of work. Like, you should have moved past that, I think.
I definitely agree with you. And one thing that I also think about as I read about child labor laws, I think about Newt Gingrich during the last election.
Yes.
And how in favor he was, because he thought that, hey, if you come from a poor socioeconomic status, well, you just got to work so you could have a better work ethic, right? This is the kind of thing that he'd be in favor of. But Newt Gingrich is not the only politician who's in favor of this kind of stuff. Senator Paul Hornback from Kentucky said that he grew up working on a farm and whatever, and he doesn't think we need to revisit these laws at all. He says, people get pretty extreme about trying to protect everybody from everything. It's hard manual labor, but there's nothing wrong with hard manual labor.
Except for the green tobacco sickness,
Yeah, here's what's wrong with it. Kids should be in school. They should be getting an education, and according to our current laws, they can work on farms during off-school hours, right?
Yes.
So they still have to go to school. But here's what they should be doing when they're not in school. They should be studying. They should be hanging out with their friends. They should be enjoying their childhood, okay? They shouldn't be doing back-breaking extreme labor or manual labor because it's something that you're okay with as a Republican. They should be enjoying their lives a little bit.
Let's let them go through high school and college, and then we can spit them out into our economic machine that will grind them into a fine paste by the time they're 65. Let's give them a couple of years before then. And I love his comment, like, I grew up on a farm. Yeah, I'm sure it was great. I'm sure the 18th century was wonderful, but it's a different country than it was then. I mean, we're trying to work on things like autonomous cars and replacement robotic, brain-controlled limbs for soldiers and things like that. And instead of being able to do that, we're having to have the same fights that early progressives did in the 1940s. I thought we had already won this battle. Why do we have to keep circling around to fundamental things like not having 7-year-olds potentially getting injured and dying on farms so that some old motherfucker could smoke a cigarette?
I know, it's insane. And by the way, I know the reason why, there are certain people in this country that are in favor of it. It sounds conspiratorial. They profit from it, and it sounds conspiratorial, but the reality is, people don't want you to become educated. People don't want you to move higher up that ladder. They pretend as if they do. They pretend as if, hey, you know what, if we get rid of food stamps or if we get rid of social services, then hey, it'll convince people and encourage people to do better. But they don't want you to do better.
Yeah.
That's why they want to privatize education. That's why they don't want to reform these antiquated child labor laws. They want to make sure they keep the poor poor and uneducated. And I have a really big problem with that.
Well, I would tweak that a little bit. I think that all else being equal, if it causes no harm to them and they could press a button and the poor would be very well off, I think they would press the button. But if it would cause 1% harm to their life, or if their taxes would go up 0.1%, then I think they'd be like, I got lots of stuff to do. Maybe I'll circle around to this button thing eventually.
Right. But it will harm their lives because
they
people are
don't
educated.
care.
If people are educated, they will question authority. They don't want that.
That's probably true.